Bring in Gabriel Noronha now, Executive Director of Polaris National Security, former State Department advisor on Iran. Gabriel, good to have you back with us.
Hey, always a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's just start with the deal as you understand it. What was achieved here?
So this is a three-phase deal. We're about to start phase one. It's going to be a 6-week process before phase two would even start, if we get there at all. So on the Israeli side, again, they're going to release over time a large number of Palestinian prisoners, and Hamas is going to release 33 hostages. Now, as you mentioned, some of those are bodies, and their families have been eagerly waiting their bodies. And so it is important that even though we wish there were more alive hostages being returned, that the return of bodies is closure for those families. This is going to happen gradually. So it's going to be hostages and prisoners released every few days on a schedule, hopefully for the first 42 days. And then phase two starts, which still needs to be fully negotiated. There's contours of that plan, but a lot of the final details have to be worked out in the next 6 weeks. And that would lead to a more permanent end to the war.
Do you envision a scenario where Hamas releases all of the remaining hostages here? Because clearly they're still holding on to hostages to use as human shields. And my guess is they don't want to give that up.
You know, what they're looking for in exchange for return of those last hostages is a total end to the war and a release of almost all Palestinian prisoners. They're looking for total aid reconstruction of Gaza. And one of the more controversial things is they're ultimately trying to negotiate basically their survival as a political party and military movement existing in Gaza. And so again, as it goes from phase one to phase two to phase three,
yes,
you get more of the hostages out, but you get much more difficult pills for Israel to be able to swallow.
How did President Trump's reelection change the math in all of this?
So this deal, a version of this deal has been on the table since May, and Hamas wasn't willing to do it because they weren't getting pressured. When President Trump won, and when he said there will be hell to pay if Hamas does not agree to this, Hamas looked at that and realized that they needed to negotiate. And what we saw in the last few days was reports coming out that Hamas made significant concessions to get their way to a yes on this deal. Again, it was that backstop of January 20th of Trump saying, if you want to negotiate with me, it's going to be much, much worse for you. And ultimately, Hamas decided, we're going to do a deal before we get there. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
President Trump's team worked really closely with President Biden's team on this, real partners on this. It's been a good transition from everything we're hearing. And that's the ingredient that allowed this deal to happen.
On the Israeli side, it seems like the only way you would accept an arrangement like this is if you credibly believed that your security is going to be enhanced going forward into the future.
I don't think they believe that, but it's a trade-off. If you talk to Israelis, they'll say, we understand that getting our hostages home means we have to give something in return, and that something is very painful. But for the families that have, had been separated from their loved ones for over 400 days, they're sort of saying, look, we just need them back home.
Yes.
And we'll deal with the problems that come down the road later. But in terms of political pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and others, it's simply the view that there has to be a deal made to get them back, no matter what the price is.
But
now,
if you're
not everyone agrees with that in Israel, but that's the view for some.
Yeah, and I noticed, I've seen, I was reading earlier Michael Oren's coverage today, his assessment of all of this, and the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, and he was kind of breaking down the domestic politics of this. A lot of the more left-leaning Israelis have wanted to come to a quicker resolution here, and the right-leaning Israelis, to the extent that we can use American descriptions of all of this, have really wanted to eradicate Hamas and get rid of that ever-looming threat of these terror attacks, so no more October 7th could occur at all. But I imagine, Gabriel Noronha, that if you're Netanyahu, if you're any Israeli, you've got to be happier having President Trump as the incoming United States president rather than a guy like Joe Biden who, kind of repeats on a frequent basis the word don't, and then, of course, every adversary around the planet ignores him.
I could not tell you how many Israelis have come up to me in the last 2 months and just said, we are so happy. We might not say it publicly, but we are so, so, so thrilled to have President Trump come in because they know that they're not going to get insulted. They're not going to have criticism about their war of survival. And they believe that the outcomes are simply going to be better. And so, almost every Israeli I've talked to is thrilled. I think this outcome, again, not everyone's going to love it, but it's something that the Israeli government, which again is a pretty conservative government, has said is in the Israeli national interest, and I think that's what matters. Matters a little bit less what the United States thinks. Matters a lot more of what does Israel say? Is this a good deal for us?
Yeah. But the role that America plays in terms of providing important capabilities, I think, is important. I was talking earlier about October 7th and kind of scrutinizing how that could occur. Obviously, Hamas conducts the attack, but whatever intelligence failures or insecurity may have existed in the region that allowed it, that's obviously deserving of good scrutiny. And the role of the United States intelligence community in all of this. Like, what kind of picture did the Biden administration have of all of this? What failures led to such a horrific terror attack taking place in the first place? And what does it mean to have President Trump and company now in charge, a more competent set in charge of some of these really important resources?
I think a lot of it was on full display in the Senate this morning at John Ratcliffe's hearing to get confirmed as CIA director. And he was saying, look, the CIA's number one focus needs to be on providing the best intelligence possible to the U.S. government. And in the past 2 years, it was sidelined from that. I'm not going to say that their number one mission was DEI, but they took their ball off the key threats, and they were paying attention and diverting resources to things like climate change, to things that just weren't as high a priority as this should have been. And they really had an ideological blind spot about the threat from Iran and its terror proxies, that they diverted resources away from it and moved them elsewhere. And that's one of the reasons that we missed October 7th. Israel also missed it, so it's a lot of blame to go around.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful that with John Ratcliffe at the CIA, some reforms coming in the Israeli system, will be on the front edge of this now.
President Trump, in his statement today, celebrating the deal as epic, and certainly giving credit to his envoy, special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, for playing an essential role in negotiating some of this, all of it. You've got he says that when the Trump administration comes back into place, that they're going to work to, quote, further expand the historic Abraham Accords in order to bring some more stability to the region. How important do you think those bilateral arrangements are between Arab states and Israel in terms of creating some of that peace so we don't have to return to this place?
Look, there are over 30 countries right now, mostly in the Arab and Muslim world, that refuse to recognize Israel's existence. They don't allow Israeli travelers. And as part of that, when you say as a government policy that Israel is sort of an enemy, it creates a permissive environment for terrorism. It creates a permissive environment for hate. And so the more of these deals we can get, it's going to do three things. It's going to benefit the Israeli public and their economy because they'll be able to travel and move forward. It'll help their political situation by stabilizing and removing terrorists in the Arab states. And it's going to help the United States because the last thing we want is more troops on the ground in the Middle East. If we can create the conditions for peace between the Israelis and the Arabs, it's going to lead to a massive flourishing of peace that we can use as a peace dividend and reinvest elsewhere. So diplomacy doesn't cost that much, and it can yield really big dividends. I'm very confident. Steve Witkoff, he's a businessman. He gets there on the job, and a month later we've got a hostage deal. So that's a really good portend of things to come.
There are 3 American hostages who are still believed to be alive and held by Hamas right now. And they are not expected to be among the first 33 hostages who are released. Instead, those first 33, we mentioned some of them are not alive. Some of these will be bodies. But among the people who are alive, we're expecting the elderly, the infirm, people who are kind of in very dire straits, and babies, for that matter, among the 33. How long will it be until we can get these Americans released? And How focused do you think the Trump administration is going to be on that effort?
So if things go well, and if there can be a strong deal negotiated, we're talking 6 weeks from now. That's when the phase two would come in and we can get those high value targets. Hamas understands that Americans are really valuable, and these are, young men. They're hopefully still healthy, and so they're going to be the most valuable assets for Hamas. Again, I am hopeful 6 weeks from now we can get them back. I think I probably came on your program over a year ago and said this is going to be one of the most difficult challenges, one of the most difficult hostage deals that's ever been negotiated.
Yes.
Just because of all the complicated dynamics. So I'm hopeful. It's going to be a tough uphill battle.
And what are the tripwires for Hamas? Like what do they have to do for this deal to be considered null and void, or for some big reaction to occur?
The big one is if they still try to hit Israeli targets. If they, this is a ceasefire that goes both ways. Most of the, leftist activists are talking about wanting Israel to stop their military operations, but Hamas has been digging tunnels and been trying to rearm, and they've been firing at Israeli security patrols left and right. So there's a question of discipline. Is Hamas willing to forego their violence against Israelis for 6 weeks? And I think a key question for Israel is, what do they see Hamas doing? Are they reconstituting? Are they building more terror tunnels? Are they trying to smuggle in more weapons?
Yes.
If that's the sign that the Israelis get, they're going to say, why are we going towards, a permanent end to the war if we're just going to have to deal with another October 7th a few years from now?
Great. That's such an important question. And then finally, to what extent can Hamas even control some of maybe the young men who are in the region and slow them down? I'm seeing right now that the so-called Gaza Civil Defense, Hamas controls everything in Gaza, is calling on residents in Gaza to refrain from firing celebratory gunfire as a result of this deal. And in fact, they say they're concerned that some of the bullets will fall from the air and hit people in Gaza. They don't want any more people dying as a result of celebratory gunfire. In other words, they're dealing with some very out of control people, Gabriel Noronha. Can they keep people in line here?
That's an important question. Their ability to have command and control has been severely degraded. That was one of the most important and first tasks of the IDF in this whole operation. Now, this is also something that Hamas is going to try to use as a shield, where it can say, oh, well, we didn't order this.
Yes.
We didn't know. We're not responsible. And so my view is always, you make Hamas responsible. You make these terror groups take responsibility, and they're the ones that have to police their members. If they believe that that's their key to survival, you can bet that they're willing to get their folks in line.
Yeah, they'll do whatever they need to. All right, Gabriel Noronha, thank you, from Polaris National Security, former State Department advisor on Iran under the Trump administration. Great to talk to you today, sir.